All right, so welcome everyone to today's session. We are going to look at introduction to web development. Okay, and my name is Daniel. I'll be your presenter today. Okay, so in today's session, we want to understand where web development begins. Okay, we want to understand a few terminologies and be able to have the confidence of starting this journey, knowing where we are headed, and in a few months we get ourselves there. Okay, so this should be a short talk, but then I would be expecting you to have a number of questions because I believe you might have been wondering where you should get started and all that. Okay, so we are going to look at the introduction, then move on to understand what front-end development means, move to the backend development, mention something about full stack development. Then we're also going to review some additional concepts and then see how to get started. Okay, so the introduction of it, one is to try and understand what web development is. Okay, and again, we say that this is a process of building, creating, and maintaining web applications. Okay, then we are going to look at the different subdivisions when it comes to web development. One of them being the front end, we have the back end, and of course, if you combine the two, you get a full stack web developer. Okay, we are going to see that. All right, then we have two key terminologies that you might end up using them where they are not supposed to be used. Okay, that is web development and web design. Okay, when you talk about web design, you are basically focusing on the UI UX. Basically, a web designer will rarely write code. Okay, they will be drawing the architectural look of a website. Okay, giving the website all those looks and coming up with a very nice design, not in form of a code, but in form of, say, let's call them a diagram or visual representation. Okay, that's the work of a web designer. Right, so these visual representations are sent to the web developer, okay, who again sits back and starts writing the code that gives a reflection of what the web designer gave. All right. All right. So we have mentioned about front end. Okay. So basically, front end is what users see and interact with directly. Okay. I'm sure we have all interacted with a web application. You access a domain name. Okay, you are required to input some of your information to register. So whatever you see, that is the front end. Okay, and we have what makes up the front end. That is, we have HTML, we have CSS, and we have JavaScript. Okay, so HTML is termed as the hypertext markup language. It's not necessarily a coding language, but just a markup language. Okay, so this is where you define elements like buttons, you have tables, forms, you have navigation bars, and all that. Okay, but then without the CSS, then they will not be appearing to a user. Okay, they will not be organized in a way that the user is able to interact with them. So that's where the CSS comes into picture to give some styles. Those colors that you see, okay, are from what we call cascading style sheets. Okay, so again, we see that the CSS gives the styling and layouts. Okay, in case you probably see that some font is bigger than the other one, then that's the work of CSS. All right, then for the JavaScript, you find some animations, form validations, and all that. So you might find that whenever you click a button to submit some data, okay, JavaScript might be invoked, probably to do some data cleaning. Then again, from JavaScript, you might also implement some nice looking animations, which again CSS also tries, but mostly are done using JavaScript. Okay, so in case you intend to be a front-end web developer, this is where it all begins. You need to learn these three. All right, but then with the recent changes in technology, this has been advanced. Okay, but essentially this is where you start, and once you are done with those three, then you need to move to the advanced front-end. Okay, and this is where if you intend to be a front-end developer, okay, so we have some frameworks or libraries used for front-end web development. Okay, so one of the popular ones, we have React JS. This is by Meta. So looking at what we have here, it's a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, okay, using reusable components. Okay, so for you to advance to this, you must have gone through JavaScript. Okay, then we have a Vue.js. Some will pronounce it as Vue, some others will pronounce it as Vue. All right, but whatever it is, it's by Ivan Yu. All right, so again, we talk of this being a progressive framework for building web interfaces and single page applications. Again, this is a JavaScript framework. All right, so remember, that tells you that you need to go through JavaScript before you move to these advanced concepts. All right, we have Angular. This is by Google. This is a full featured TypeScript based framework for building large scale web applications. All right, so in your front-end journey, once you are done with the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then it's advisable to pick one of these. All right, so from what I've seen, React.js is a bit popular. All right, but then no harm in interacting with the three of them, then settling with at least one, because once you interact with them, you will be in a position to see which one solves the problem at hand the best way you would like. Okay, then when advancing your front-end skills, we also have some CSS preprocessors whereby you can talk of Sass and less. All right, so again, this comes in handy when trying to advance the CSS functionality. All right, and as we have mentioned, you can do these three of them, then cover one of them here. All right, so once we are done with the front end bit, okay, so there is a user, and this user is filling in a form. All right, so you fill in a form, think of it being a registration form. You submit your details. So the question is, where do these details go? For a website to be able to process data, there must be a database. All right, so this database, of course, we have quite a number of options for databases. Okay, so in here we can talk of MySQL, Postgres, we have Mongo, and we also have others. So for this data to travel between the front-end bit and the database, we need a language in between. We need an agent. Okay, and this agent is the backend languages. All right, so between the database and the front end, we have a language that will come in, process that data, then push it to the database. Okay, and of course, when you want to retrieve the same data from the DB, this backend language will take up this data, process it, then push it to the front end. All right, so for the backend languages, we have quite a number. Okay, and from the list, we see we have JavaScript. Right, so after going through JavaScript, we have some frameworks. All right, so one of the key frameworks of JavaScript, we have Node.js. All right, that is what is used for backend web development. All right, then when you come to Python, we have some frameworks like Django, we have Flask. Okay, so these are the key frameworks when it comes to Python. They are to help you process the data, push it to the database, and pull it from the database, push it to the front end. All right, then we have PHP, and in this we have Laravel. Okay, then we also have Ruby on Rails. All right, of course, these are just a few, because again, we also have Go. We have a language called Go language. Okay, it's in this list as well. All right, but then when it comes to popularity, I believe Node.js and Django, these are quite common. All right, and you also find Laravel in picture, and also Go. Also, Go language is another popular language that you might come across. Okay, so for you to be a backend developer, it's always a good idea to be able to appreciate whatever happens in the front end. Okay, so you might not be so perfect on the front end bit, but you are able to appreciate what happens in the front end. Okay, so in case you intend to be a backend developer, you just go through the front end bits, understand what happens there, then you can move on to the backend. All right, so if you are lucky and be able to handle your skills for both front-end and back-end, then we will term you as a full stack developer. All right, so this is a person who has mastered both the front-end and the back-end. Okay, and we have some popular stacks. You might come across some of these terms. Man stack, right? Somebody who has a combination of what you see here. All right, you might also come across such a term, okay, which again is a combination of what you see here. All right, then moving on to the additional concepts. So for you to be a web developer, all right, there are some concepts that you will need again to appreciate. So besides being able to design your website, work on the front end, on the back end, and the database, then that application needs to be shared with users across the globe. All right, so that is where a web hosting comes into picture. All right, and again, you also need a domain name. So think of a web hosting as that space in the cloud where you will upload your website files, and this domain name is what will be used to access that website. Okay, remember, when you are designing your website locally, you can easily access that website using a local IP. All right, then when it moves to the cloud, then you will need a domain name. All right, then we have something else we call. Okay, so when it comes to working on code, we have something you come across called GitHub. Okay, and this control version component. All right, and what is GitHub used for? So one of the key uses is that you will need to be sharing your code with your colleagues, maybe for review or for some fixes here and there and all that. Okay, so maybe the idea that would come into your mind without having rant about GitHub is you zipping the code, sharing it with them on WhatsApp, on email, or any of those channels. But then we have something we call GitHub, which again helps developers to collaborate. All right, you push your code somewhere, it's maintained there, then anytime you make an update, you publish it there. All right, and from this you are also able to easily get that code to your server whenever you want to deploy that application. All right, so something else you might need to appreciate is web security, and in this block we re-emphasis on SSL. Whenever you are accessing your website, I'm sure you have seen a padlock like icon, all right, which again secures the data transfer between the server and your browser. All right, so it's all about installing an SSL certificate that will be securing the communication between the browser and the server. All right, then we also have something we call DNS. So this is what connects whatever we called the domain name here and your hosting server. All right, so I'll term it in that simple term: whatever connects your domain name and the hosting server. All right, then we have application deployment. So again, you will be required to interact with quite a number of platforms so that you get your application online. All right. Then in this line, as long as we are talking about web development, we have another option. Okay. So I'm sure we have come across WordPress. All right. So this is a content management system whereby you do not need to explicitly have the coding skills, like those who are designing the website, from doing the designs, working on the front end and the back end. Okay, so what WordPress does is that it simplifies the process. You just need to drag and drop some elements to get your website done. Okay, so basically that's all that is required of you to be able to explore the web development stack, whether the front end, the back end, or being a full stack developer. All right.